So the human brain,
Yeah.
it's mind-bogglingly complex, isn't it?
It really is.
I mean, storing a lifetime of memories, skills, everything that makes you you. How does this, like, 3-pound organ even manage that?
Well, for decades, the answer seemed pretty clear. It's all about the neurons, right?
Right. Those cells firing electrical signals, making connections,
Mm-hmm.
the synapses. We thought that was basically the whole memory game.
And it made a lot of sense. Neurons are electrically active, their connections change, they're plastic, and there are billions, 86 billion of them?
Yeah, something like that. A
Yeah.
huge network. It felt like the obvious place for, memory storage.
But, what if we've been kind of focusing on just one part of the picture?
Hmm.
What if there's another major player, just as numerous, sitting right there that we've sort of overlooked, at least in terms of active memory storage?
You're talking about astrocytes.
Exactly. That's the really provocative idea coming out of some new MIT research. It's the basis for our sources today. This work suggests we might need to seriously expand our view.
Astrocytes. The star-shaped cells.
Yeah.
The ones usually described as, like, the brain support staff.
Yeah, the cleanup crew, the nutrient delivery system, managing blood flow, all that essential background work.
But you're saying they might be doing memory? Actively participating?
That's the bold hypothesis, not just participating, but potentially being critical components of a really high-capacity memory system, working with neurons in ways we just hadn't fully grasped.
Okay, wow. That sounds like a pretty fundamental shift.
It could be.
Let's dive into this then.
Yeah.
We need to look at the traditional view, get a better handle on these astrocytes, see what clues suggested they might be doing more.
And then there's this fascinating new computational model.
Right, and how that model connects astrocytes to the brain's huge memory capacity. And crucially, what does this all mean? For neuroscience, but also maybe for AI. What if memory isn't just about neurons firing?
Okay, so let's set the scene first. We've got the neurons. 86 billion powerhouses, firing action potentials, sending signals across synapses, thinking, learning, memory. Undeniably crucial.
Absolutely. And then right alongside them are the astrocytes. Also billions of them, star-shaped, with all these complex branching arms or extensions.
And their known jobs, as you said, are supportive. Metabolic support, keeping the chemical environment stable, helping manage blood flow. Essential functions, but not typically seen as computational.
Not involved in the actual processing or storing of information itself.
That was the standard model, yes. But researchers started noticing things, especially about the structure of the synapses themselves. We usually picture a synapse as just two neurons connecting.
Yeah, the presynaptic and the postsynaptic neuron. A two-way street, or one-way rather.
Kind of. But it turns out these fine little extensions from astrocytes, their processes, often wrap really tightly around those synaptic connections.
So it's not just two players at the table.
Often it's three. The two neurons and the astrocyte process, all right there at the junction. This led to the term tripartite synapse.
Tripartite. Okay, so the astrocyte is literally embedded right where the communication happens. That alone seems like a hint it might be doing more than just, passive support.
Exactly. That structural closeness was a big clue, and the hints got stronger with experimental work.
Oh, yeah. What kind of work?
Well, studies, especially in areas like the hippocampus, which is critical for memory, found that if you mess with the connection or communication between astrocytes and neurons, you actually impair memory. Memory formation, recall, both seem to suffer.
Wow. Okay, so that's pretty direct evidence. Interfering with astrocytes hurts memory. They must be actively involved somehow.
It strongly suggests that, yes, not just passive bystanders.
So if they are involved, how do they communicate? Neurons have their fast electrical spikes. Do astrocytes do the same thing?
No, and that's a really key difference. Astrocytes don't fire those quick all-or-nothing action potentials. Their main way of communicating internally and responding to neurons seems to be through changes in calcium levels inside the cell.
Calcium, like the
Yeah.
mineral.
The very same element, but in the cell, it acts as a really important messenger. We can actually see these calcium signals now using advanced imaging. We see waves or fluctuations of calcium within astrocytes.
And these calcium changes relate to what the nearby neurons are doing.
Yes. They seem to respond to the activity at those tripartite synapses.
So what's the proposed loop here? How does it work at the synapse?
The idea is something like this. The astrocyte process wrapped around the synapse senses the neurotransmitters and the activity between the neurons.
Okay, it's listening in.
Right. And that sensing triggers specific patterns of calcium changes inside the astrocyte.
And then what does the astrocyte do with that calcium signal?
Well, those calcium changes can then cause the astrocyte to release its own signaling molecules back into the synapse. They're called gliotransmitters.
Gliotransmitters. Okay, so glio from glia, the type of cell astrocytes are, and they send these back to the neurons.
Exactly. These gliotransmitters can then influence or modulate how the neurons at that synapse are communicating. So you get this feedback loop.
Neurons talk astrocyte, listens via calcium astrocyte, talks back via gliotransmitter.
Precisely. A constant dialogue.
Which brings us to the big question, right? What is the astrocyte doing with the information it senses? Is it just tweaking the signal, or is it actually, computing something, storing something?
That was the mystery the MIT team wanted to crack. One of the authors, Leo Kozhikov, put it nicely. He said something like, there's a closed circle between neuron signaling and astrocyte to neuron signaling. The thing that is unknown is precisely what kind of computations the astrocytes can do.
With the information that they're sensing from neurons. Yeah, that's the core of it. What's happening inside that astrocyte.
So to try and figure that out, they turned to computational modeling. Specifically, a type of AI model called a Hopfield network.
Hopfield networks, I've heard of those. They're used to model associative memory, right? Like how hearing part of a song can bring the whole thing back.
Exactly that kind of thing. Retrieving a whole memory from a partial cue. Hopfield networks are good at capturing that process.
But don't they have limitations?
Yes.
Especially when you try to scale them up to something like the brain's capacity.
They do. Traditional Hopfield networks, where the connections are just between pairs of units analogous to simple neuron-to-neuron synapses, they can't actually store that many different patterns. They hit a capacity limit pretty quickly.
Okay, so the simple model doesn't scale well enough.
Right. But interestingly, in the AI field, there's been this development called dense associative memory.
Dense associative memory, what's different about that?
It's a modification that allows these networks to store vastly more information, dramatically higher capacity.
Wow.
By going beyond just pairs of units interacting. Dense associative memories involve higher order couplings, where groups of more than 2 units interact simultaneously.
Okay. So computationally, if you allow for interactions between triplets or quartets or larger groups of units, you can store way more stuff.
That's the key insight from AI, which then posed a biological puzzle for the researchers.
How does the brain do that? Because synapses usually just connect 2 neurons, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get these higher order many neuron interactions?
And that's where the astrocyte comes back into the picture. This was the spark, the main hypothesis. Dmitry Krotov, who led the study, pointed out that while networks with only pairs of connections are limited, dense memories need connections involving more than 2 neurons. And he thought, wait a minute.
What about the astrocyte?
Exactly. He said, because a single astrocyte can connect to many neurons and many synapses, it is tempting to hypothesize that there might exist an information transfer between synapses mediated by this biological cell. That was the big inspiration.
That makes so much sense. The astrocyte physically reaching out and touching potentially hundreds or thousands of synapses from many different neurons. It's perfectly positioned to be the biological mechanism for mediating these higher order interactions.
Precisely. It could be the missing piece that allows the brain to implement something like dense associative memory.
So did they build a model based on this?
They did. They developed a computational model that included both neurons and astrocytes interacting in this way.
What did it show?
The results were pretty striking. Their neuron-astrocyte model could store significantly more information, orders of magnitude more than the traditional neuron-only models.
Wow. Enough to potentially get closer to explaining the brain's actual memory capacity.
Enough to make it a very plausible mechanism, yes. It suggests the physical architecture we see astrocytes woven throughout the neural network might be the hardware enabling this high-capacity storage.
So the hypothesis is that memories aren't just in the strengths of the neuron-to-neuron synapses,
but also encoded somehow in the astrocyte.
Yes. Encoded in the dynamic patterns of calcium flow within the astrocyte network, patterns that are shaped by the combined activity of all the neurons that particular astrocyte is connected to.
So the astrocyte acts like a little hub, integrating information from many neurons and storing patterns based on that collective activity.
That's the idea. And then it uses those gliotransmitters we talked about to communicate that stored information, or the results of its computations, back to the relevant neurons at the tripartite synapses.
It's a constant dynamic interplay, a coordinated dance between neurons and astrocytes.
And that coordination is crucial for boosting the memory capacity.
Apparently so. Kozhikov mentioned this specifically, saying something like, By careful coordination, you can get exactly the dynamics you need for this massively increased memory capacity. It's the synergy between the neuronal network and the astrocytic network.
This really reframes the astrocyte, doesn't it? It's not just support, it's potentially a fundamental computational unit itself, or maybe even smaller parts of it.
Yes, the model suggests that perhaps the astrocyte processes the specific parts interacting at the tripartite synapses could be seen as computational units. The tripartite domain itself might be the key functional unit.
And this model doesn't just offer higher capacity, you mentioned something about energy efficiency.
That's another intriguing aspect. Dense associative memories are known in AI to be very efficient. They store a lot of information relative to the number of components you need.
Okay.
In this biological model, having an astrocyte process mediate interactions across many neurons could provide a very high ratio of stored information patterns compared to the number of astrocytic units involved.
So fewer units doing more work, essentially.
Kind of. And this efficiency actually gets better as the network gets bigger, which makes sense for an organ like the brain that consumes so much energy. You want efficient storage.
That is compelling. And the potential scale of this storage. Is it really that much bigger?
It could be enormous. An external expert, Maurizio De Pita, commented on the work. He noted that if you view these tripartite units as fundamental, the model suggests each unit could potentially store as many memory patterns as there are neurons in the network.
Wait, as many patterns as there are neurons?
That's the implication he drew. He added that this leads to the possibility that, in principle, a neuron astrocyte network could store an arbitrarily large number of patterns limited only by its size.
Arbitrarily large. That's just staggering compared to the old models.
Yeah.
A complete change in how we think about the limits of biological memory.
It really is. It opens up a whole new landscape of possibility. Now, we have to remember this is still a hypothesis based on computational modeling.
Right. It needs to be tested in actual biological brains. How would scientists even do that? It sounds incredibly complex to test experimentally.
It is challenging, for sure, but the researchers themselves suggested ways forward. A key goal would be to develop tools that let experimentalists specifically target and manipulate the communication just between astrocyte processes and neurons at those tripartite synapses.
Like turn the astrocyte signal up or down at specific connections.
Exactly, or block it selectively, and then see precisely how that affects memory tasks in animals. Dmitry Krotov made a point of encouraging this, basically saying, we hope experimentalists take this seriously and design experiments to test it.
So the ball is kind of in the experimentalist's court now, but beyond neuroscience, this must have ripples for AI too, right? You mentioned the model came partly from AI ideas.
Absolutely. This could feed back into AI in a big way. It offers a potential new blueprint for building artificial neural networks.
How so?
AI researchers could start playing with architectures that explicitly include astrocyte-like units, mediating higher-order connections between neuron-like units. They could explore different ways to connect these astrocytes, how many neurons they connect to, how they integrate signals, and see what kinds of new capabilities emerge.
So AI inspired not just by neurons, but by this integrated neuron astrocyte system.
Precisely. The researchers even suggested this approach might help bridge different concepts in AI. For example, maybe you could smoothly transition between a network that's good at dense associative memory, pattern completion, and one that's good at attention, like in large language models, just by tuning the properties of the astrocyte-like connections.
That's fascinating. And it feels timely because AI has kind of drifted from its biological roots lately, hasn't it?
It really has. Jean-Jacques Slotin, another author, made this point. He noted that while early AI took inspiration from neuroscience, a lot of recent neuroscience hasn't really influenced AI much. Modern AI algorithms often look very different from biological brains.
They've become powerful, but in their own engineered way.
Right. And Slotin suggests this work might be part of reversing that trend. He said it might be one of the first contributions to AI informed by recent neuroscience research.
So neuroscience potentially offering genuinely new foundational ideas back to AI. That's a really exciting prospect.
It really is. A two-way street opening up again, perhaps.
Okay, so let's just wrap our heads around this one more time. The core idea. Astrocytes, those star-shaped cells we thought were mostly just support.
Might actually be active, high-capacity memory units working hand-in-glove with neurons through these tripartite synapses.
Unlocking potentially orders of magnitude more storage capacity than we thought the brain had, using this mechanism inspired by dense associative memory from AI.
Exactly. It shifts the picture from a purely neuron-based network to this deeply integrated dynamic system where astrocytes play a vital computational and storage role.
This is the kind of hypothesis that could genuinely reshape neuroscience and at the same time offer completely new pathways for developing artificial intelligence. It's a really powerful concept.
It definitely is. A lot to explore, both experimentally and computationally.
So maybe the next time you effortlessly pull up a complex memory, a face, a scent, a whole scene from years ago, just pause for a second. Consider that it might not just be your neurons firing in sequence. There could be this whole other layer of computation and memory humming away, hidden in plain sight within those star-shaped astrocytes, coordinating information across vast networks in ways we're only just beginning to appreciate. What other incredible computational secrets might still be hiding within the intricate architecture of our own brains?